Good morning, everyone. I'm Rupi Rai, PPP consultant based in Washington, D.C., and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, which is the third webinar in the PPPs in sub-Saharan Africa series. Our topic today is communications and social license issues in Kenyan PPPs. This webinar series is hosted jointly by the Open Learning Campus, by the PPP Unit Kenya, and the World Bank PPP Group. Today, in today's webinar, we will look at some of the key issues surrounding communication and stakeholder engagement in PPPs in Kenya. Now, why is this topic important and why are we looking at this today? Public-private partnerships change really the way a public service is delivered. And this tends to create uncertainty for not only end users, but also for the workers providing the public service. As a result, PPPs disrupt the status quo, can impact the outcome of PPP programs and also project ideas. Now, managing stakeholders by consulting and involving affected people in time is critical to the success of all projects, but in particular of high-profile, large and complex projects, as PPPs often tend to be. In Kenya, some of the emerging issues surrounding stakeholder engagement include the willingness to pay for surveys, for example, disagreements with project host communities, and also the reluctance on matters related to land acquisition. Therefore, a clear dialogue and transparent communication between the government and key stakeholders are imperative for achieving stakeholder support and establishing ownership of PPPs in a country. In this webinar today, we will look more closely at ways of engaging with communities and different stakeholders in PPP projects, and we will obviously look more closely at Kenya. Today's presenter is Kara Wainaina. Welcome, Kara. Kara is a communications specialist who has been in practice for 10 years. He first worked for NTV as a business and economics reporter, and he has also worked with Kenya Electricity Generating Company for 3 years. There he was involved in a number of stakeholder management assignments, for example, the Resettlement Action Plan for the Olkaria 280 megawatt geothermal power plant, which we'll be discussing later on. Currently, Kara is the external affairs expert in the PPP unit of the National Treasury of Kenya. He's involved in stakeholder management, communication, media relations, and capacity building. Kara holds a Bachelor of Arts in Communications from Daystar University in Kenya, and he has also undertaken a number of PPP-related training courses in Washington, D.C. Our discussant today is Simon Ngure. Simon is an engineer, and he has practiced for the last 31 years. In 1981, he joined the East Africa Power and Lighting Company, and in 1998, he joined Kenyan as a senior drilling engineer. He later became the head of the projects department. Currently, Simon is the director of the Regulatory and Corporate Affairs Division, and he's responsible for facilitating a conducive regulatory environment and also managing Kenyan's public image. Among the projects he has been involved is actually the same as Kara, which is the geothermal power plant. Simon holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Nairobi, and he also holds several diplomas, for example, in geothermal development from Auckland University, project management from Cambridge Association of Managers, and advanced management from Strathmore University. Simon is a member of various local and international professional bodies. Currently, he's the vice president of the Association of Energy Professionals, Eastern Africa chapter. Now, we will start with Kara's presentation. It will take around 30 to 35 minutes. It will be followed by Simon's remarks for about 10 minutes. As always, if you have questions for our speakers, please send them to us via chat. We'll have some time allocated for Q&A at the end. And with this introduction, over to Kara.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruby, for that very kind introduction. And hello, everyone. Great to see you, and very glad that you could find time to be part of this webinar. As Ruby says, we'll be looking at communication and social issues in the Kenyan context. And we're going to be looking at some of the trends and that we have seen in the past couple of projects, and look at some of the projects that we are implementing. So as a way of how I've structured this discussion, we are going to start with an introduction, as I've said, and we're just going to give a context in the Kenyan space within which we are implementing the various infrastructure projects. Then you're going to look at some of the notable infrastructure projects that have happened in Kenya in the past. For the purpose of this discussion, I've included some of projects which are not necessarily PPPs, but even other infrastructure-related projects, whether they were funded by government, because ideally we should still be able to learn a couple of lessons from how they were done. And we're going to look at some of the projects that we are currently doing, which we have undertaken a couple of feasibility studies and see what the feasibility studies are saying. And eventually, towards the end of this presentation, we are going to look at the trends that we have seen and the lessons and the reflections from some of these projects. So starting right from the Kenyan context is that Kenya became a British colony in the 20s and was so until the 60s. And in this era, we saw that government decisions on infrastructure was largely by fiat. There wasn't much discussion on involving the stakeholders, be they the beneficiaries of the projects or the host communities that would host the various projects. And when Kenya became a republic, gaining her independence in 1964, more or less the same trend continued, where economic growth was the main thrust for undertaking whichever infrastructure projects, and issues to do with engaging with the stakeholders were very, very minimal, if any. And that's really how the country was for the first 20 or 25 years between her independence, which is the government just undertaking a project because they are convinced it's a good project, but really not taking time to answer questions to do with how socially responsible they are or how environmentally sound they are. Currently, things have, but starting with the 80s, going all the way to the 90s, we saw the democratic space in the country expand greatly, and these have had a huge impact in everything, governance, and even how infrastructure projects are envisioned, and even how they are implemented in the country. Currently, Kenyans have a great deal of influence in the investment program of the country, and as regards infrastructure projects in particular. Kenya did adopt a new constitution in the year 2010, and what this constitution did is that it gave the citizens in the country many rights and strong voice in deciding which projects are done, and even how those projects are undertaken. The constitution, for instance, gave rights to information that when you are undertaking the huge various infrastructure projects, you ought to provide quite substantial detail to the citizens. The constitution also did provide strong rights to movement and residence. So when projects involve where resettlement and involuntary movement of project affected persons are concerned, their rights are fairly well protected in the constitution. Environment, consumer rights, and land protection are now very strong aspects in our constitution. And what this has done is it has made the citizenry even more aware of their rights as far as projects are concerned, and they now clearly understand they can give or grant or withhold social license to various projects. On the reverse, on the other hand, the corporate world has really become more conscious of the need to attain and to acquire social legitimacy before they undertake the various projects that they are planning to undertake. Looking now at some of the notable investments we have had in the Kenya's infrastructure, and as I said earlier, some of them are PPPs, some of them have been funded by public means, but they are all in all, they are projects that are quite important for us to consider and see which learnings we can glean from them. Between the 1930s and 1980s, there was a floating pontoon bridge connecting the coastal city of Mombasa with the mainland. This was a bridge that had been done by a private citizen, and because of that, he used to levy charges. He had a toll for people passing through the bridge, and he had different rates for people, for livestock, for vehicles, and we keep saying that is really the first example of a PPP project in the Kenyan context, in as much as it was not done with regard to any particular regulatory framework. In the 1980s, we saw the Kenyan government move to the Olkaria area, which is about an hour and a half drive away northwest of the Nairobi capital, and the government implemented a geothermal plant. Why I mention this geothermal plant is because it was really the first plant in an area that is very has great potential in geothermal production. But when this plant was undertaken, the government didn't do any major stakeholder engagement or consultation with the communities that was there. All that the government did was, show up one day and tell the local communities, the pastoral communities there, that you need to pave way, you need to move to a different side of this field because we want to undertake a project. Later, in the mid-90s, Kenya opened her power sector to many private sector players, and you have many power producers that have been in operation for the last 10, 15, 20 years. Fortunately, for most of the independent power producers we've had in the country, land acquisition, the land has been provided by the government, so there hasn't been much resistance in terms of acquiring the land and having disputes, as we shall be seeing in some of the other projects. In the year 97, Safaricom, which is a leading telecom company in the region, was started as a subsidiary of Telecom Kenya, and later Vodafone PLC acquired 40% stake in that. In the year 2006, we saw Kenya and Uganda jointly decide to concession the railway line, which runs from the coastal city of Mombasa all the way to Uganda. In the year 2012, there was a construction of the 280 Olkaria megawatt plant, geothermal plant. This was publicly funded, but as why we included it here is because we think it provides an interesting case study, as we shall be seeing later on. In the year 2014, there was the Kinangop wind plant, which was started. Unfortunately, that project 2 years later, it was cancelled early in the year due to conflicts with the host community. And this is also an interesting case study to look at because it has interesting insights on how to ensure that the future projects tend to get a better success. Let me start with the Rift Valley Concessionaire, and as I say, this was a line that was done by the British in Kenya in the about 100 years back. It was a huge company. At its height, it employed well over 25,000 employees. Between the 80s and 90s, there was a huge decline of the rail line in Kenya due to multiple factors, and that led to the rail not being able to do what it was meant to do. In the early 2000s, the government had a couple of attempts trying to restructure the company, and what that meant is that there were huge staff rationalization programs that ended up with many being retrenched, and that paved way for the project, the railway line, being concessioned in the year 2006. And with the signing of a private concession, there were huge expectations on that line and its performance. But because of how the staff rationalization program was undertaken, there was a bit of a sour taste, if you may, in the mouth of many, and that led to huge protracted court battles, some of which are yet to be concluded. And the final position has been, because of largely the retrenchment and having to do with the cutting of huge workforce, there still remains a bit of a sour taste in the mouth of many people as far as that project is concerned. Looking at the Olkaria 280 geothermal plant, as I said, this huge geothermal plant is in Olkaria. It was the third government plant there because there was the Olkaria 1 that I mentioned at the start of this presentation that was done in the 1980s. There was Olkaria 2 that was done a few years later, and Olkaria 280, whose construction started in 2012. Olkaria 280 plant was one that saw Kenyan, the company that was responsible, really go out of its way to try to speak as much as it could with the local community and to ensure that there is a wide buy-in in the local community in how that project was done. So Kenyan really went out of their way and prepared a resettlement action plan, a comprehensive environmental social impact study. And part of it was a resettlement action plan because a couple of families needed to pave way for that project. But then the site where this project was located was a bit sensitive due to a couple of factors. Number one was there was 4 villages with an indigenous Maasai community, that called that home and who carried on with their livestock production from that area. But also next to that site was an area gazetted as a national park, And so really how to navigate that area and try to balance all the different players in that field was quite important. And also, the Olkaria area, the local community largely have had communal land ownership for a long time. And as we shall be seeing later, this form of land ownership comes with a bit of complexities in how you handle the various people who have might need to pave way for the project. So the Olkaria 280 project, as I said, the company that implemented it really went out of its way to engage the community well before the project started. But then when the construction project started, the larger communities, especially not necessarily the people who are the actual project affected persons, but the larger communities, was feeling they also should enjoy some benefit from the project. So once in a while you would see a bit of protest in the region, and in some instances even stopping the work that was going on to develop that plant. Also, what we saw in the Olkaria case study was that the local communities are becoming very aware of their rights, and they would petition, including the financiers, are quite well aware that the financiers are fairly more sensitive to how the local communities are treated. And so really they were really able to put a lot of very strong lobby voices to ensure that their concerns were taken into account. So really Olkaria was a project that, in my opinion, did a good job of engaging the communities, trying to help them understand why the project is done, the benefits that are going to be done, but also saying now that a couple of you are going to be moved out involuntarily to pave way for the project, this is how we are going to do it, and this is the land we are identifying to move you into, and this is how we are going to handle the compensation. But despite that being done, we still saw a couple of protests, as you can see on the slide, and really there was a bit of back and forth where the communities would say they are happy one day, and the government and Kenyan would be quite happy to proceed. And then a few months down the line, you would see them saying not every aspect had been handled well. But eventually, despite the back and forth in the process, all the community that were affected by the project was successfully resettled. And a few days to the commissioning of the plant in August last year, every one of them had been settled. And I think that was quite important, and that was quite a good milestone, that all the communities were settled before the project was eventually commissioned in August last year. Let me look at the Lamu coal plant, because this is also a project, as you can see again on the picture on the slide, has had a couple of interesting issues. In 2014. Kenya invited bids to do a BOO of the first coal plant in the country to generate 960 megawatts of power. And there was a bit of a dispute with the procurement and people moving to court about, those disputes were settled and dismissed by court. And now we are getting to the stage of getting that project up and running, or really gearing up towards construction of the Lamu power plant. And again here, there are a couple of complexities to be navigated. For one, Lamu town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site as the oldest Swahili settlement in the East African coast. And now that means is that how that project is going to be implemented, a lot of caution and care will be needed to ensure that it doesn't end up messing or destroying a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Currently, the environmental and social impact assessment is being undertaken, but already we are seeing a lobby of our local and non-governmental actors, raising a lot of concerns and beginning to ask whether it's necessary for that project to carry on. Fortunately for the Lamu coal plant, all the land required for that has been identified and set aside by the government, and also the government has put in place a resettlement action plan that is being implemented by a multi-agency kind of group. So the big concern now shall be whether it will be an interesting case study to look at how it proceeds so far. So a lot of right things have been done, in my opinion, but then we can see enough questions being asked by the local community, and we can see the non-governmental actors really getting ready. So really it's an issue of ensuring that every concern is being well addressed for the project to proceed without much delay. Let me look at the Kinangop wind project, and briefly, this one, as I said, is one of the unfortunate stories of projects in Kenya. It was envisioned to be a 60 megawatts greenfield wind project. Initially planned to be done by Kenyan and Ecogen wind farms, but later, that was to change. The Kinangop wind project was to be situated in Nyandarua, which is a rich agricultural zone in the central region of Kenya. And so the communities and the people who live in that area, are very, very, very zealous in protecting their land and protecting their income. Then what happened in 2008, the project was acquired by Aeolus, and Aeolus later engaged General Electric to do the operation and maintenance of the plant. Again, in 2013, Africa Infrastructure Investment Fund and Norfund took over the ownership. And why I highlight that detail about the change of ownership is because ultimately it did affect how the communities, the host communities perceived that project, as we shall be seeing later on in the presentation. And the Kinangop wind project, unlike many projects in the past where you've had a bit of conflict, but issues get resolved as they go, as the projects proceed. In Kinangop, we saw that the challenges were quite huge right from the onset. And it was also interesting because most of the landowners, the individual landowners where the wind masts were to be built, were quite okay with it and were happy with the compensation package that was being given. But the wider community, felt that they are also beneficiaries of the project. They should also enjoy some benefit from the project. And so, whereas the immediate host of the project were happy, the wider community was not necessarily as happy, and we saw them getting to the roads, demonstrating, and unfortunately, even a life was lost in the demonstration. The change of ownership of the project movers did not augur too well for the project, because what it meant is that the people that commenced negotiations and discussions with the local community kept changing as the project proceeded, and this, of course, had the unfortunate effect of watering down the trust that had been built on the project. And so as time went on, the dispute got quite out of hand, and we saw allegations, some of them which were fairly scientifically unfounded, such as allegations of radiation. Some of the communities claiming that the harming of the turbines would cause miscarriages, it would make their livestock infertile, and really a lot of these were issues that would not stand, of course, any scientific scrutiny, but it still gained ground and provided fodder for the local community to oppose the project. What we also saw in Kinangop, some of the local upcoming politicians really seized the crisis of that project to try to build their profile ahead of the general elections, which are scheduled in Kenya in 2017. There were also a couple of non-state actors, who unfortunately, some of whom didn't appear too keen to see the project happen as much as to see the project collapse. And so after a bit of conflict back and forth, the project collapsed early this year, with the project mover citing force majeure, and the project really didn't happen. But then it was quite interesting to see some of the local leadership that were opposing the project trying to re-engage with the investors, saying they should, no, we were just asking a question. We never meant you guys to go away. We would still be keen on you coming back to do the project. And that is quite interesting, as I shall be observing later, where sometimes in Kenya you see local communities and the local leadership in different areas opposing projects, not necessarily because they don't want the projects to happen, but rather using that as bargaining chips to be able to ask for what they perceive as better compensation. So those are just some of the projects that have happened in the past. Let me look briefly at where we are in terms of PPP projects that are now being implemented as we speak, and then after that I'm going to finish my presentation with some of the lessons that we have learned looking at all these projects. So some of the leading projects, the Kenyan government has planned to develop the Mombasa-Nairobi highway, which is a stretch of road of 482 kilometers, a very important road connecting the capital city of Nairobi with the coastal, with the port city of Mombasa. and part of the northern corridor. So it's a very important route for us in terms of moving cargo from the port of Mombasa to the capital of Nairobi and further on within the larger East and Central African region. Then when that road comes from, so that's Mombasa to Nairobi, when it gets to Nairobi, it proceeds as Nairobi-Nakuru, another stretch of 174 kilometers, and this road is a bit congested. So the government wants to concession the road as a design, build, finance, and operate. Then also the government is keen to do a second bridge connecting the coastal city of Mombasa to the mainland, estimated to be between 600 to 800 meters. Then there are a couple of two roads that were done in the recent past. There is the Nairobi-Thika road, which is a road which is 50 kilometers, and the government is looking forward to concession the operation and maintenance. Then there is another road, which is a bypass connecting the Nairobi-Mombasa highway to the Nairobi-Nakuru highway, which is a stretch of 28.6 kilometers. Now, these are called the fast mover projects in the Kenyan context, not because really they are the first PPP projects that have been undertaken, but mainly because they are the projects that are being implemented after Kenya adopted a very specific PPP legal regime. And so these roads, the government has just concluded undertaking a feasibility study, which were done by transaction advisors. The projects that require development and then the development aspect will require substantial land acquisition, and it's envisioned there is going to be involuntary movement of some of the project affected persons. Fortunately, for the projects that have already been done and that are planned for operation and maintenance, they may not require much of land acquisition, so they might be viewed as easier to implement in that regard. So on all these 5 projects, the feasibility studies have been conducted. And what is also interesting for these 5 road projects is that they are all planned to be done as toll roads, after toll roads have been out of the Kenyan system for quite a while. Let me look briefly at 2 of them in detail, just to give a feeling of how we see issues of them being accepted as toll roads coming into play. So the Mombasa-Nairobi highway, part of the feasibility study has been to undertake a willingness to pay survey. And what you have found is that 75% of the respondent of the motorists who've been surveyed on that road saying that yes, they are ready to pay a toll on it. And many of them are suggesting they would be comfortable to pay anything between 6 to 7 cents per kilometer of the road. But then, their willingness to pay for a toll on the road is very key to improve the level of service on the road, which obviously is expected to translate into low vehicle maintenance cost and save man hours. We are also seeing many of the motorists on the road saying they would be okay with a toll on the road as long as they can see the benefit, as I have said, and also given that that toll road is done in a fairly automated sense and it's very seamless from one road to another, to avoid there being delays and being congestion on the roads, which is one of the issues that the roads are meant to, the projects are meant to address. Similarly, on the Nairobi-Nakuru corridor, we have seen also that there are fairly strong willingness to pay of about 6 US cents per kilometer. And again, most of the motorists saying they would pay for the toll as long as there are very clear benefits in terms of saved man hours and also low vehicle maintenance cost. Then also most of the motorists in that section observing the need for discounts for the frequent road users for those projects. That is the easy bit of it. As I said earlier, those roads are going to require substantial land acquisition, and what you have seen in the past is that where there is a land acquisition needs, then that almost always contributes to the complexity of attaining the social license and the social legitimacy to operate and to undertake such a project. So in brief, the general sentiment we have seen on road tolling is that it is acceptable where clear benefits are visible to all, especially in decongesting our roads. The media has been supportive, but questioning certain elements of the government tolling plans, such as asking questions whether everywhere the government plans to have a toll road, whether the government will provide a free alternative, and also calling for prudent use of the tolls that are raised for the projects. The civil and consumer right lobbies have also been quite visible, calling for care to ensure that all the rights I mentioned at the start, be they rights of movement and as non-discriminatory, are all well protected. No one suffers undue harm by a toll road being introduced in any part of the country. The government on its part has been quite strategic and firm, which is good, underlining that yes, we do want to toll some roads so that we can have a modern infrastructure in the country, but then this process will be very inclusive and participatory and well thought out to ensure that all the concerns of the communities, especially who are going to host this project or the motorists who are going to be on these roads, are well taken into account. We have seen that there is need of a big discourse in the country because sometimes there is a feeling of proposed toll roads as a new backdoor tax. And so really there is a need to have a national discourse on the fact that PPPs are quite necessary to have quality roads, and they come with a certain cost, and we must get a way of meeting that cost. Then there is also a couple of sticky elements that we clearly see will need to be addressed for toll roads to be successful in the country. One of them is a levy which is called the roads maintenance levy, which is charged as a component of the fuel prices in the country. Now, the roads maintenance levy was put there to maintain roads in the country. But then what has happened is that over time, the road network in the country has greatly expanded, and the fuel maintenance levy is not, it's fairly insufficient to care for the operation cost of the roads. But then, because it's still part, it's geared towards maintenance of roads, so there's a bit of a confusion as to why then should we charge another toll when there's already a toll that most citizens perceive as being meant to maintain our roads. And so really, a discourse will need to happen in terms of how much money is being collected through the roads maintenance levy, which has been fairly insufficient to try to build a better case of why then toll roads are still required in addition to that levy to have better roads in the country. So looking at finally, looking at all the projects that we have done, past and present, what has become very clear is that land is the most important aspect in terms of attaining social license to operate, and how you undertake land acquisition and resettlement, if any, is going to determine to a large extent how the community are going to be supportive or non-supportive of the project. What we have also seen is that in some isolated incidents, there is tendencies by the local communities to try to profiteer, not just get a compensation for the disturbance and the loss that would come with them moving from one area to another. In one extreme case, we saw a community that was rooting for an approach to a project that would result in the highest, disturbance, so that larger groups of members of bigger groups of communities are affected, and hence there's a bigger compensation package. What we have also seen is that in many cases, the local communities are not opposed per se to the projects, but rather are using the concerns, the real ones and also the imagined ones, as bargaining chips to be able to get a better compensation package. Unfortunately, in Kenya, we have seen the NGOs, some very genuine, to try to protect and safeguard the interests of the local communities, but in a few instances, some who are just out there to cause as much trouble and to delay and to have as bigger problems as they can, to even build a bigger profile. Then we have seen in lands related issues that in some areas, especially in the remote areas where the government has not had substantial investment, the locals demanding to whomever is coming there to do a project, be it a private person, demanding almost any benefit they think they ought to have received from the government, and they haven't received so far. So, the reflections on land is that, our views is that it should be handled by the government as far as is possible, that the government should plan and budget early to ensure it has sufficient resources to resettle and people even needs to do so. We have also, it's also our view that it's ideal to acquire all the land required for a project prior to commencement. We also, of the view that comprehensive and broad consultations with project affected persons is very critical, with the project getting the social legitimacy that it requires. We also think that acquisition of land in projects should not be hasty, neither should it be too prolonged. When it's done in a hasty way, the communities are likely to oppose a project and feel they were not well consulted. When the land acquisition, mechanisms and processes are too, take a long time, organic growth of the communities tend to result in more complexity of the issue. Then we would say that effective grievance resolution when a project is being implemented is quite key. And where we can't acquire all the land prior to a project commencement, then possibly facing the project might be important. So that you start with the sections of the project. If it's a road, for instance, where the land is already acquired, as you move out and try to sort out and acquire the land where it might not be. And maybe I should give the Kenyan government some credit here, where we are seeing that over time the government is really working to standardize the process of acquiring land for projects, which we see as quite a key and important step to ensure that land acquisition tends to be smooth and ensure that projects are not unnecessarily delayed, and also the people who might be affected by the project also get their due compensation, and it's done in respect with all the international and local protocols to ensure it does not result in any undue disadvantaging the people who are affected by the project. As far as tolls are concerned in the country, what we have seen is that for PPP projects that have an end user element, social license issues assume even a far much more significant proportion. So you really have to do a very thorough job of engaging with whomever you expect to pay a toll to help them understand why you are collecting a toll, how the toll is being used, and to help them see the new benefits that comes with the new improved infrastructure. So it's quite critical to explain how those fees are also determined and reviewed. It's very critical to explain how to aspect as far as tolls are concerned. And ultimately, it's important to get a strong political will, because ultimately, in Kenya, like in many other parts of the world, citizens would be hesitant to pay for a service which they feel should be, provided by the government. So it's quite key for them to, for a discourse to happen, and people not to feel as if the government is stepping back, but rather that the government is still using public resources to do what it can, but also tapping into the extra private capital to be able even to undertake more projects and hopefully have a faster development of the country. So I think I would want to leave it there and end with that quote from Pierre, who is a former president of Newmont Mining Company, who observes that you don't get social license by going to a government ministry and making an application or paying the requisite fee, but rather getting social legitimacy and being able to undertake an infrastructure project and operate in a market. Then it requires far much more than money. It requires you to really integrate and become part of a community, and it requires for you to view, for the local and host communities to view you as one of them and to be supportive of the project that you are undertaking. I think I want to end my conversation there and hand it back to Rupi.
Thank you very much, Kara. This was a very interesting presentation. We've been receiving a lot of good questions also on your presentation. I would like to go directly to Simon now. Simon, 5 to 10 minutes for your remarks on this topic, and it will be really interesting to hear the private sector's perspective on this.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Can you see me? All right, let's go on. And thank you, Kara, for that very insightful presentation. A couple of items that I would like just to note from what Kara has just said before I make additional comments is that, yes, there are a couple of issues that I think in the PPP project will become very important. One of them has got to do with the willingness to pay, as Kara said, but at the same time, the ability to pay. We are beginning to see questions about whether the tolls will be for the road and whether they will compound, whether when one road connects to another, what's going to happen in that space. And of course, the migration from the roads maintenance levy, if this same road users will have to pay the levy and at the same time pay the toll, then they might feel that the taxation is too steep, as they are seeing it right now as taxation. What the one thing therefore is important to do is ensure that there is a lot of education and that there is sufficient time for a shift in the cultural mindset of the Kenyans. Without proper change management, we could face handles that are at a national level just because possibly people feel that this is way too much, it's over the board, or sometimes it could be hijacked for national political interests that might actually derail the project. So I think that's a very important key. The second issue is about land. And I just want to make a comment here that we do have a law that enables the government to undertake compulsory acquisition of land that is needed for national projects. However, the process is lengthy and there is still an issue about what is a fair compensation. Most people feel the fair compensation is market value, and that's way out there. People have all kinds of ideas as to how much that would be. So there will finally be a need to probably have additional legislation which looks at how much land can be compensated for in every locality, and that could be zoned. And at the same time, a way of valuing or ensuring that possibly the investments on the land are valued at current values. That would be market. Of course, one of the issues that always complicates these two comments that I've made is politics. People feel that getting masses after you for whatever cause is something that should be used at every instance to gain popularity, and that's always a problem in Africa. The solution, though, is to continue delinking the politics from development as much as possible, so that investors are not frustrated and so that people can quickly begin to access the benefits of infrastructural development. Because without that, again, there is no economic growth, and the entire communities come under pressure of not seeing growth and being forced to continue in a life of consumer-based life, which doesn't have sufficient growth base. So I think those are comments that are very key. I thought let me make those right from the onset. Now, additional comments are about the process. And I want to mention this because there is the 280 megawatts project was very useful for us. We've worked with the communities before, but this one was very useful because we moved 150 families. In total, we moved 1,100 people. And it was no mean effort because the process was very lengthy. We began in 2009 with negotiations with the community. So far, we've not quite closed the project. So we've still got a few issues. But one of the things that a few comments about what we've learned. Number one, that it's very important to do a high quality stakeholder mapping exercise. If one does not understand exactly who the stakeholders are, whether they're using the formal authority stakeholders, the informal authority stakeholders, they will shape the environment in which the project is implemented. And because of that, it is important to understand those stakeholders. The other thing that's become key to us is that it's important to understand the culture of the host community. There are some communities, and Kara mentioned these, that own the land in a communal, as a community. And those are much more difficult to work with than the people who own individual pieces of land. The reason being, they keep pursuing a communal mindset, which is very difficult to bring together and coalesce into a single decision. And so there is this to and fro where people come in and say, this is what we want, and the following day they've changed their mind. And as they try and build that agreement amongst themselves, then the ground keeps shifting. So understanding the culture, understanding how the people work helps prepare the project proponents to ensure that the process that they use to engage the communities and the rest of the stakeholders will meet the needs, whether be the investment and time needs of the project. The second thing I would want to mention is that it's important to ensure that within the wider community, the compensations and livelihood support that are provided appear to be reasonable and fair. Because what happens a lot of times is that if, for example, the Maasai community, if they feel that the people who have been resettled have not been treated fairly, then they will go out and bring other people who are not affected by the project, and they will come and they'll become complainants. And then they can encumber the project. They can stop access roads and on all kinds of other things. So it's important to ensure that that the entire process has a human face, and that anybody could come and say, yes, that's fair, it's equitable, it's reasonable. So that's a very critical point, because other people are watching as well. The third point is that there needs to be a structured consultative grievance handling mechanism. Tara has mentioned this. I cannot overemphasize this. Because if that's not in place, then bad blood keeps building, and project proponents and local communities will keep fighting, because the people who are the minority or a few and are dissenting to one aspect do not have an avenue of having that one aspect discussed to its logical conclusion. So a grievance handling mechanism is critical. Of course, I did mention that the politics can hijack a project, and in Kenya we've seen that. Kara mentioned an example of the Kinangop wind farm. And so it's important to consider, how do politicians get represented? Usually when we go to a community or to a village and begin to ask for representatives, they will elect the most able person in the community, the opinion shapers. But when you ask a politician to provide a rep, he will pick somebody in the community who may not have the buy-in of the community, but through the politician, this person can also take away the wrong message and create a situation where other people can also become complainants. So I think the handling of political influence is very key. May I also add that the community and all the stakeholders need a continuous conversation to be put in place, and a table has to be available where everybody meets, and it must be regular. And if there are issues to resolve, the people must meet more often. In Kenya, we call this the stakeholder coordination committee. If you're doing a resettlement like the one we just did, then you need an implementation committee for the resettlement action plan. So that place where people meet, it's regular, and everybody knows I can come and be heard, and a structure that enables that conversation to leave a table with a few people and go out there to the public and be seen to be reasonable and fair is very important. So holding public meetings similar to the ones that we would expect when an environmental and social impact assessment is being done is a need that keeps coming up once in a while. And I would really recommend that be built in whatever project is being done. My last comment is about ensuring that everybody has responsibilities. If the community don't feel that they have something to do and they're just sitting waiting for benefits to trickle down to them, the likelihood of having people who are saying, okay, we don't have anything to lose even if the project closes down, has happened in Kinangop, I think is something that shouldn't be allowed to happen. So when dealing with communities, it's important that the reps are respected, that there is a process of ensuring that the information gets down to the grassroots, and at the same time that there is a way of ensuring that everybody had the same thing, and that there is a proper coordination of ensuring people get the proper benefits. So in Kenya, the Stakeholders Coordination Committee, which we call the SCC in short, is the one that manages, say, for example, there's casual work to do, and we need to employ 5 or 10 local people. They don't need to have specific skills, or they have skills that are available in the community and that kind of labor is needed. We use them to decide who, and we also ensure that the project proponent is observing how they do that, so that it's not one specific group of people that keep benefiting and others don't benefit. So that kind of consultative, continuous conversation needs to happen even in the distribution of benefits. Let me stop there and possibly hand it back to you, Rupi, and we could have a conversation around this.
I hope you can all hear me. We've been receiving a lot of questions. Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Kara. There's a lot of interest in land acquisition and stakeholder engagement around that. So I'll ask you a few questions, and in the interest of time, I will ask you to keep your answers short and brief, please. One of the questions is from Mariano Salto. He asks, is there a role for county governments in land acquisition or resettlement processes? Maybe you can talk a little bit about the local role, local government, institutional role, please.
What I would say is that the new constitution we adopted that I did mention, it gives the roles and the functions that should be undertaken by the national government, and those that are to be undertaken by the county government. And in a similar fashion, so if a project is to be implemented by the national government takes the lead. But whether there is a role of the county government, I would say yes, because the county government is the one which is very close and has proximity with whomever to be affected with the project. So in such a case, the acquisition would be led by the national government, but with very close coordination with the county government, which is next and very, very close to the actual persons to be affected by the project.
May I add that it's important to understand that the county government has got specific functions that only they can handle. One of those, for example, is the approval of construction drawings. They don't take it as a very technical need for approval, but they do evaluate the size of the constructions and give them an approval and value them. There is a fee to pay for that, and only they can do that. So basically, they must be involved. So in Kenyan, what we're doing is to have a representative of the county governor, and having from the political side, and then we are also getting a representative of the county government parliament. Somebody that can talk to the county government parliament and have a discussion there concerning how the project is going on. So and that's what I said about stakeholder engagement. The initial stakeholder mapping must look at all these issues, and the county government is now featuring very strongly. We are waiting for one more legal framework in Kenya, which is the sharing of benefits from projects. That hasn't come through yet, but there is a bill, and the direction of the bill is that the county government will get 15% of loyalty type benefits from every project, and the local communities will get 5%. So that again has to be managed by the by the county government. And when that becomes law, all future projects will have some kind of assessment of what the royalties are, and then there will be an accounting process that comes out of that. Meaning that in future, out beyond the investment phase, there is still going to be in the operational phase need for stakeholder coordination committees to continue to sit and discuss. And in Kenyan, we've already set those in place. So we've got now long-term associations that we're going on with at every level of interest.
Thank you, Simon and Kara. Let me combine two questions here. One is from Noriko Yasukawa. The question is, from which stage can local community, local governments, and NGOs be involved in a project? And I would combine it with Marisa Lorenzo's question, which is phasing a project where, for instance, land acquisition cannot be taken fully from the very beginning, is that too risky? Could it result in the partial realization of projects and potentially push projects faster?
Let me have a go at the first question, and I think that's a very important question. And what I would say is that my view is that engage with the communities as early as a project has been decided to be undertaken. So we don't even need, and I think that's a common mistake that has happened in a couple of instances where people wait for a project to start before they start engaging with their host communities. And I think it's very fundamental that as early as the government or whomever decides that a project is going to carry on, that we start engaging with the local community to help them understand what exactly is happening. My view has been that in the absence of information, it tends to create a very fertile ground for anxiety and people not understanding exactly what's happening. So it's a good practice to talk to people early and connect that with a question that I saw about how do you engage the local communities who ideally may not be needed to be consulted in the day-to-day running of the various power plants or huge projects that you are undertaking. And what I will say is that the local communities are also very much aware to how much they should be engaged. It would be quite bizarre, for instance, for a local community to insist they should be consulted on how someone is running a power plant. They clearly know that is not in their respective area of mandate. But then, so we must strike a balance, speak to them early, and speak to them to the issues that they need to know. I think both ways there is a good understanding that even the local communities do not expect to be involved in every aspect of the project. And maybe Simon could mention a couple of other issues.
I do quite agree that the Kenyan public is very well versed with their limits. The only thing that could probably drive them slightly beyond their limits is political interest, or in some cases where they feel that what's being done has not properly addressed the entrenched rights within the Constitution. Outside that, they tend to be very reasonable. And that is why a number of projects continue to actually get done and with a fair amount of success. So I wouldn't add much more. May I only mention that if you do not engage the community early enough, it becomes more difficult to get to resolve the issue of land acquisition, and especially if the land is in private hands. I think it's important to talk to them early. They begin to socialize among themselves. They begin to look at how reasonable the project is. And at the same time, it gives the project proponents an idea of how, is this going to be too expensive? Is it going to be too difficult? And most communities want to carry the conversation to a very mature stage before that decision is made. So I would say, for example, if you look at the Kinangop case, there is an area there where political interests were not properly represented, but again, also a few people were left out of the conversation. But basically, the first thing is talk to the community. If that doesn't work, the very, very back end, for a project that must be done, a section of the road must be covered, then I think compulsory acquisition is the very last option. Thank you.
Let me just...
Okay.
I know
sure, go ahead, Kara.
Yeah, but very quickly on the phasing of a project. And my view is for projects such as road projects, where a substantial alignment is already within government hands, say something like 70-80%, I think in such projects we can phase them and start with the sections that are already in place. But then I agree for projects where huge sections of the required land are not safe within our hands, it might be too risky to start those projects until all the land issues have been cleared with.
Right, that answers both questions. Thank you. Last question, please, very, very brief answers. It's a question by Morak Baird. How should we deal with informal users of land that may not have a formal title? How do we deal with them at an early stage in land acquisition?
If you look at, in Kenya's, approach to environmental and social impact assessment, there is a very clear compensation mechanisms, even to people who might be deriving a certain livelihood from a certain parcel of land, but who are not formal owners. So I think this is a very well traveled path. There are ways of being able to calculate, whatever benefit they were getting on land, and just compensating them for that because they are not the actual owners of land. So I think when you're coming up with a compensation regime, it does clearly define which stakeholder is affected by how much, and of course to have a comparative compensation for the disturbance that they are going to suffer.
And just to complete that, in Kenya we have a law that enables people who have been sitting on land for more than 12 years to lay claim to some of that land. And in Kenya, a couple of cases have been determined in court where the court has offered 25% of the size of the land to be what these communities could take away for themselves. And in that particular case, then if the project needs the land, then 25% of that land has to be negotiated as owned by the community or owned by the specific people who are there, irrespective of the fact that they may not have title to the land. Nevertheless, if the landowner had already complained to the government that these people on this land illegally, then they don't get any benefit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting remarks and also great questions from our audience. I think this discussion really showed how important a joint community strategy is, how important it is that all the different stakeholders work together and from a very early stage involve the people involved and also the stakeholders involved and engage them in the project, engage them in a fair and transparent communication about a project. Thank you, Simon and Kara, for your time today, for making very interesting points. And also thank you to our audience for listening in on this third and participating in this third webinar in the PPPs in Sub-Saharan Africa series. There will be 3 more webinars in this series. We will continue in September. So please stay tuned, look out for our emails on the next webinars. As always, I will please ask you to fill out our webinar feedback form. Please give us suggestions on how we can make this better. Let us know what you think. And as always, the recording of this webinar will be available 24 hours from now. And we hope you will join us again. Thank you.